we watched the sunset. We were bringing back up to start talking, but I didn't want to miss the sunset. So I think she just posted it, and I think she turned to look at sometime, and
we can just sit back here and
my mother-in-law can't hear. It's coming down. That we don't know. And I was like, yeah, just don't. I'm like, oh my word. So James comes around the corner. I go, did you see her fall? And he goes, no, when I heard it. I think everybody did, yeah. She's like, I mean, I was like, somebody that knows me yes, that was the first day. The rest of the time was okay. Yeah, the rest of the time was fine, but I thought, how do you know the medication or something? It was yours. Yes. I know. Someone beside you. Yeah. I graduated poetry. There are yeah, because I'm going to help her and we have longer now. I'm not going
I don't want to get out and
and I want to welcome everyone. We've got some new people who haven't been here the last time. We're just starting the book master. This is the book that we're using if you want to get it. Okay? Somebody who has the book that has started on a lesson in it, tell us why you should get it. Anybody?
I do a lot better if I can read something here and read something here and try to put it together and, make notes and stuff in it. The questions she asked, some of it is just old school fill in the blank, and some of it is you've got to think about it. But for me, I do better if I have to write something down.
And it's not hard. There's 5 days. It doesn't take you very long. And it kind of keeps you going with what we're talking about. But if you don't get the book, we go over everything in the book here. So it's not like you have to. But if you do want something, these are really good. And somebody asked me last week how I got one with this binding. Well, Ashley knows. She told me how to do this at Kinko's. FedEx. You just take it and you say, hey, I want this bound. They'll cut it off, do it in about 2 seconds, and it's $3 or $4. And it makes it easier to lay and do. So there you go. The Kinko's, I call it Kinko's, but it's FedEx Chick-fil-A. UPS probably does. Anyway. Okay, so I'm not gonna ask for a show of hands. But I hope you read through the book in one solid setting. So I'm not gonna ask for a show of hands, but I'm gonna ask for somebody who did it to tell me what was good about doing it. I'm not gonna look at anybody, so.
I started watching a video of it.
Okay. And
I fell asleep.
Somebody else give it a try here.
Man, you did.
Anybody that read through it that would recommend that and why? Anybody? it is a story.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like some of the books, you know, that you read that are, you
And
know,
it's a wonderful gift with
and how does reading it all the way through in one sitting help us?
I think you see the growth in Esther as she goes through the whole process,
Okay.
and then how her life is affected by everything that was going on. And as a woman, I think it's wonderful. That,
Yeah.
you know, only two are named. So that's
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so I hope you did. Or if you haven't read through it, I hope you did that because I really, really think that it's powerful. And you can see the themes much more powerful when you read it all the way through. They just pop. And we're going to talk about those in just a few minutes. We're going to first start with a prayer, and then we're going to watch the Bible Project on Esther. So if you didn't read it all the way through, this is the Cliff Notes, like we used to say in the old days. We go through it and see those. But it's about 9 minutes. It's not very long. But it'll give us a summary of the whole thing. If you're not familiar with the Bible Project, you can Google it, Bible Project, and it has every video on every book and all kinds of things, and it's great. I think you'll see that. If anybody had not seen a Bible Project video before? Okay, so a few of you. Okay, so let's start with a prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for this time that we can sit down and that put things outside of our mind and that we can concentrate on what it is that you would have us learn. We ask that your Spirit help us to study this remarkable book, show us what you want us to see, and help us see the opportunities you have for us, and then help us act on those opportunities. Help us be witnesses for your name and not waste our time being afraid to share with others. And help us speak confidently the name of Jesus. We ask that you fill our hearts with your word tonight and fill us with your Spirit. We're so thankful for all that you've done for us. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let us see if this will work.
The Book of Esther, one of the more exciting and curious
Y'all hear at the back?
books in the Bible. The story is set over 100 years after the Babylonian exile of the Israelites in their land. And while some Jews did return to Jerusalem, remember Ezra and Nehemiah, many did not. And so the Book of Esther is about a Jewish community living in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. The main characters in the story are two Jews, Mordecai and then his niece Esther. And then there's the king of Persia, who's something of a drunken pushover in the story. And then there's the Persian official Haman, the cunning villain. Now this is a curious book in the Bible, mainly for the fact that God is never even mentioned, not once. Which might strike you as kind of odd. I mean, isn't the Bible about God? But this is a brilliant technique by the author, the novelist, in that way. It's an invitation to read this story looking for God's activity. There are signs of it everywhere. The story is full of very odd, quote, coincidences and ironic reversals, and it all forces you to see God's purpose at work, but behind the scenes. Let's just dive into the story. The book opens with the king of Persia throwing two elaborate banquet feasts that last a total of 187 days, and it's all for the grandiose purpose of displaying his greatness and splendor. On the last day of the banquet feast, he's really drunk, and he demands that his wife, Queen Vashti, appear at the party to show off her beauty. She refuses, and so in a drunken rage, the king deposes Vashti and makes the silly decree that all Persian men should now be the masters of their own homes. Then he holds a beauty pageant because he wants to find his queen. Really bad soap opera. But it's right here that we're introduced to Esther and Mordecai. Esther hides her Jewish identity and enters the beauty pageant and wins. And the king is so obsessed with Esther that he elevates her to become the new queen of Persia. Now after this, and even more serendipitous, is the fact that Mordecai just happens to overhear two royal guards plotting to murder the king. And so he informs Esther, who in turn informs the king, and Mordecai gets credit for saving his life. Now right here from the beginning, God's not mentioned anywhere. But this all seems providentially ordered. What is it that God's up to? You have to keep reading. We're next introduced to Haman, who's not actually a Persian. He's called an Agagite. He's a descendant of the ancient Canaanites. Remember 1 Samuel chapter 15. The king elevates Haman to the highest position in the kingdom, and he demands that everybody kneel. Well, when Mordecai sees Haman, he refuses to kneel, which of course fills Haman with rage. And when he finds out that Mordecai is Jewish, Haman successfully persuades the king to enact this crazy decree to destroy all of the Jewish people. And to decide the date of the Jews' annihilation, Haman rolls the dice. A die is called pur in Hebrew. Tuck that away for later. 11 months later, on the 13th of Adar, all the Jews will die. Haman and the king then have a drinking banquet to celebrate their really horrible decision. So the focus now turns to Mordecai and Esther, who are the only hope for the Jewish people. They make a plan that Esther is going to reveal her Jewish identity to the king and ask him to reverse the decree. But approaching the king without a royal request is, according to Persian law, act worthy of death. So in a key statement, Mordecai is confident that even if Esther remains silent, that deliverance for the Jews will arrive from another place. And then Mordecai wonders aloud. He says, who knows? Maybe you've become queen for this very moment. Esther responds with bravery, and she purposes to go to the king with her amazing words, if I perish, I perish. Now in what unfolds, we watch the ironic reversal of all of Haman's evil plans. So Esther hosts the king and Haman at a first banquet, and she says that she wants to make a special request of both of them at an exclusive banquet the following day. So Haman leaves the banquet totally drunk, and he sees Mordecai in the street. He fumes with anger, and he orders that a tall stake be built so that Mordecai can be impaled upon it in the morning. It seems like things can't get any worse for the Jews and for Mordecai. But all of a sudden, the story pivots. It just so happens that night, the king can't sleep, and he has the royal chronicles read to him. Good bedtime, and he just happens to hear about how Mordecai had saved his life. He had totally forgotten. So in the morning, Haman enters to request Mordecai's execution, and the king in that moment orders Haman to honor Mordecai publicly for saving his life. So now Haman has to lead Mordecai around the city on a royal horse, telling everyone to praise him. Now this moment in the story is a pivot for the whole book. It begins Haman's downfall and Mordecai's rise to power. Watch how this works. The day after is Esther's second banquet. So the king and Haman arrive, and Esther informs the king that first of all she's Jewish, and second that Haman has enacted a decree to murder her and to murder Mordecai, who saved his life, and to murder all of the Jews. Now the king's had a lot to drink, so when he hears this news, he goes into yet one more drunken rage, and he orders that Haman be impaled on the very stake he made Mordecai. It's ironic and a grisly way for Haman to go. Haman's execution, however, doesn't solve the problem of the decree to kill all the Jews. So the focus now turns to Esther and Mordecai as they make a plan to reverse the decree. They discover that the king can't revoke a decree that he's already made. So instead, the king commissions Mordecai to issue a counter-decree. On the appointed day that all of the Jews were supposed to be killed, the 13th of Adar, now the Jews are ordered to defend themselves and to destroy any who plotted evil. Then Mordecai, Esther, and Jews everywhere hold banquets and feasts to celebrate this new decree, and Mordecai is elevated to a seat beside the king. Eventually, the decreed day comes, and the Jews triumph over their enemies. First, they destroy Haman's family, and then any other Persian officials who had joined the plot. And then on a second day, they get permission to destroy any who plotted against them throughout the entire kingdom. This results in joy and celebration as the Jews are rescued. The story then tells about how Esther and Mordecai established by decree this annual 2-day feast of Purim to commemorate their deliverance from destruction. And the name of the feast comes from Haman's diet. Remember, Purim. The book concludes with a short epilogue as Mordecai is elevated to second in command in the kingdom, and we are told now of his royalness and splendor as the Jews rise. Now, step back. Notice how this story ends. The story was full of reversals, but we can now see the whole story is structured as an ironic reversal, right down to the details. So the king's splendor and feasts and decrees are mirrored by Mordecai's splendor and feasts and decrees. Yeah. Esther and Mordecai, they first saved the king, but now in the end they save all of the Jews. Then you have Haman's elevation and edict and banquet that marked by Mordecai's elevation and edict and banquet. And then at the center, you have Esther and Mordecai's planning scene. And then Esther's two banquets that act as a frame around the greatest moment of reversal of hope. Haman's humiliation and Mordecai's exaltation. Beautiful. Another fascinating feature of this book is the moral ambiguity of the characters. There's a lot of drinking, anger, sex, murder, of which Mordecai and Esther are a part. Not to mention their violation of many commands in the Torah, like marrying Gentiles or eating impure food. And so the story is not putting Mordecai and Esther forward as moral examples, as if it endorses all of the behavior. But they are put forward as models of trust and hope when things get really bad. And so the book of Esther comes back to that question with which we begin. Why God is not mentioned. The message of this book seems to be that when God seems absent, when his people are in exile, when they're unfaithful to the Torah, does this mean that God is done with Israel? Has God abandoned his promises? And the book of Esther says no. It invites us to see that God can and does work in the real mess and moral ambiguity of human history. And he uses the faithfulness of even morally compromised people to accomplish his purposes. And so the book of Esther asks us to be willing to trust God's providence even when we can't see it work. And to hope that no matter how bad things get, God is committed to redeeming his people. And that's what the book of Esther is all about.
Okay. So I hope that helps you. There's some things in that are really, really, really good, I think. Okay, so when you read through the book of Esther, or just now watching the video, what recurring themes do you see?
Drinking.
Yeah, there is drinking. Good themes.
There's a commitment that God makes that's like delivered in those small ways that you can just follow. You don't have to be like it's not a blatant in your face, but you can follow that commitment that he makes to them
Okay.
and save them.
All right. You see his faithfulness. You see rescue throughout. You see the deliverance throughout and redemption. You know, you see those things. And like I thought this was really good when they said the coincidences, you know, or this just happened. You know, and they didn't mean that. You understand that, okay? So how is God visible even though his name is never mentioned in this book?
But that's why God's everywhere. He heard.
Okay, he did.
Very true.
Like he had promised them. Okay.
That verse that you says, I know I shall live to see God. You know, it's one way of thinking about it, the irony is so neat. It's like the good people win, bad people lose. But also, you know, God's people were being persecuted, exile and torment, but they live to see the goodness of God. We're sad.
Yeah.
But it feels
Yeah, it does. Okay. You know, he is always working on behalf of his people. And that's what, right there at the end when they said, you know, I love about this story because it was a mess. And they were a mess. And they weren't doing what they were supposed to. And he still worked through those people and he still used them. Well, then I like to think about, well, how does this apply to us? Well, this world is a mess. We're not doing what he wants us to do. It's not like it's supposed to be. But he's going to work on behalf of his people. And we've got to keep remembering that instead of just getting up like, oh, everything's so bad and everything's so terrible. Well, yes, and in his time. Well, it was bad and terrible there. I mean, think about that. We're going to look back over through that. So if you had to summarize it, I think we talked about this last week. If you had to summarize the book of Esther in one sentence, or I'll give you two, but one sentence, what would it be?
God can make
Okay, that's good. God can make the impossible possible.
Doing what is right will bring its rewards.
Okay? Doing what is right will bring its reward.
God will use ordinary, imperfect people to do extraordinary things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what did Mordecai tell her there? If you don't do this, God's going to do it. You know, and he says that same thing to us. If you don't do this, it's going to happen. I'm going to do it. But think about what you'll miss. Think about what you could do in your part in this. You know, okay? So the book of Esther provided a model of how the Jewish people could not just survive, but thrive in a Gentile environment. Remember, they were in a foreign land in a Gentile environment. Is that not where we are? And he didn't want them just to survive. They could thrive, okay? And the display of his work is very evident, you know, even though you didn't see him. It's deliverance and redemption, making this orphan girl the queen, and then using her courage and her influence to save the Jews, you know? So who's the main character? Who's the main character? God. You know, they put up there the, you know, characters, but God's the main character of this story. Okay? All right, so Kelly starts off with getting our bearings where we are. So tonight's going to be a little bit of getting ready to see where we are. And she did this some last week in the starting. But we're going to start in Genesis to see where we are. So turn your Bibles to Genesis, and somebody read chapter 12, verses 1 through 3. Wants us to see where Esther's story falls in the grand story. Okay, and we're part of the grand story, the grand narrative of God's work from Genesis to Revelation. So we're going to start in Genesis 12. Somebody read 1 through 3, and then somebody else grab chapter 17, 3 through 7.
The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all people on earth will be blessed through you."
17, 3 through 7.
Abram fell face down, and God said to him, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come. Be your God and the God of your descendants after."
Okay, so we're going to go through Genesis to Esther real quick here. And I'm going to say it, I'm going to leave blanks, and you're going to fill in this. And we're going to just go through this story. Kathy, you ready? Okay. God promised to make Abraham into a great nation. Who would ultimately be blessed through Abraham? Who would ultimately, everybody, I'll get it out. How did God secure the promise to Abraham?
The covenant.
Through a covenant. Very good. And God promised 3 things in that covenant. What did he promise Abraham? 3 things. Land, father of nations, countless descendants,
Blessings.
and great blessings. All the nations would be blessed through him. So after God made that covenant, what happened to Abraham's family? It grew, okay? Genesis then goes on to tell us the story of Abraham and his sons and grandsons and all the way through Joseph. So during Joseph's generation, Abraham's descendants relocated to Egypt to escape what? The famine in Canaan, right? Okay? So then we moved 400 years. We're going fast here. We moved 400 years. God's people have grown into a thriving nation in Egypt, and they were known as the Israelites. The Egyptians persecuted them and subjected them to forced labor. Then who comes into the picture? Moses. Okay? Moses led them out of Egypt to the promised land of Canaan, right? Were they content to live in their own land under the rule of their own God? No. What did they want? They wanted to forego the opportunity. They wanted to be like everybody else. So they wanted a king. Okay? And then I stop and ask myself, is that not what we want? We want to be like everybody else. We want to have a house everybody else has, wear what everybody else has, want to look like everybody else, right? Never happy. Never happy and content. They weren't either. Okay? So God gave them a king. Did it go well? No. But God was still Faithful. God was still faithful. So he made a covenant with David. All right, so let's look at this covenant in 2 Samuel. We're getting closer to Esther. 2 Samuel chapter 7. Somebody read verses 8 through 17. It's a little bit long, but let's pay attention to this covenant and see what we can learn out of it. Chapter 7, 8 through 17.
Now go and say to my servant David, this is what the Lord of heaven's armies has declared. I took you from tending sheep in the pasture and selected you to be the leader of my people Israel. I have been with you wherever you've gone, and I have destroyed all your enemies before your eyes. Now I will make your name as famous as anyone who has ever lived on the earth, and I will provide a homeland for my people Israel, planting them in a secure place where they will never be disturbed. Evil nations won't oppress them as they've done in the past, starting from the time I appointed judges to rule my people Israel, and I will give you rest from all your enemies. Furthermore, the Lord declares that he will make a house for you, a dynasty of kings. For when you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants, your own offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong. He is the one who will build a house, a temple, for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. If he sins, I will correct and discipline him with the rod, like any father would do. But my favor will not be taken from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from your sight. Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secured forever.
Okay, so how long did God promise David's throne would be established? Forever. Okay, so keep that in mind as we keep going. Okay, forever. All right, then Nebuchadnezzar comes in, and he attacks Jerusalem, and he destroyed the city, he destroyed the temple, and he exiled the vast majority of the remaining Israelites to Babylon. Okay, this is where it all, northern kingdom, southern kingdom, it all gets, complicated there. The worst was that God's glory left the temple and the city of Jerusalem. So what did it mean for the covenant God made with Abraham years earlier? What did it mean? What would happen to the land? What would happen to the descendants? What would happen to the blessing for all nations when one nation through which the blessings would come was scattered? Now that's what we're going to find out, right? Okay. So Esther details the account of the Jews who lived in Persia after the exile. Okay. Life is never going to be the same as it was for them before the Babylonian exile. Yet God's faithfulness is going to prove to be unwavering. Okay. So now let's go over to Jeremiah. And somebody read Jeremiah 29, 10 through 14. Jeremiah 29, 10 through 14. Who's got that?
This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good plans to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you a hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. I will be found by you, and will bring you back from captivity. I will gather you from all the nations and places where I have banished you, declares the Lord, and will bring you back to the place from which I carried you.
Okay, hold on to that, Amy. We're going to come back to something there in just a minute. So this passage directly relates to the exiled remnant that's living in Babylon and the people that we meet in the book of Esther. So Israel was in captivity for how many years? 70 years. What was the promise that God made to his exiled people? I'll bring you back. I'll give you a hope. I'll give you a future. I'm going to bring you back, right? Okay? So Jeremiah's words were written to the exiles living in Babylon. They had lost their city. They had lost their temple. They'd lost their priesthood. They'd lost their monarchy. They'd even lost their sense of identity. Okay? But God reminded them through Jeremiah that he would not forsake the covenant that he had made with them, even in the midst of that devastation. Okay? He'd not break the promise to David about the throne being established forever. So we go back and ask what was going to happen to all that. He's going to honor everything that he said. That God was still authoring the story, and he was still going to bring it to completion. Okay? And again, this should give us hope. Okay? Jeremiah's prophecy was not written to us, but it's written for us. And no matter what you're going through, no matter what you've done, no matter what's been done to you, God longs to bring you home. Always. Okay? He's still writing the story today, and he will bring it to completion. Guaranteed. Okay? So, we learned that Nebuchadnezzar carried the Israelites into exile into Babylon, but Amy, go back to Jeremiah 29 and read verses 4 through 7. This is the command that God gave his children. So, tell us what he told them.
This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper.
Okay.
That was so weird to me.
Yeah. Because what would we feel like doing? If that were us, what would you feel like doing? Would you feel like building a house and building a life?
Oh, God.
Yeah, I mean, you know, in a time like this,
Is he telling them to marry non-Jews? Or does he mean stay in your own little group? Like, eat their food. And always before, he told them, when you go into those countries, don't.
and we talked about last week where it said that he caused, he carried them. He caused. If you go back and look, and I went back and looked at the original word, and that's what it means. He took them.
God's word, this is all nations. This is how it's been.
Yep.
The word of God is going to all nations. This is how it's
Yep.
This is how it's spread. It's not just for Jesus. It's for everybody.
Right. Yeah, and so it does. It kind of takes a surprise there.
And it's spread.
Yeah.
It's spread. It's almost like bloom where you're planted.
Yeah,
Like
it is, and that's what he told them. Okay, so what did they do? They found jobs. They built homes. They raised children in this foreign land. And then about 50 years after the Israelites left due to the Babylonian regime fell to King Cyrus and his Persian Empire. Okay, so let's see what happens next. Okay, we're getting there. Ezra. Somebody read Ezra 1 through 5. Ezra 1 through 5.
In the first year, Cyrus was king of Persia. The Lord caused Cyrus to send an announcement to his whole kingdom and put the decree in writing. This happened when the Lord's message spoken by Jeremiah true. Wrote, this is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given all the kingdoms of the earth to me. And he has appointed me to build a temple in Jerusalem to you. May God be with all of you, his people. You are free to go to Jerusalem and build the temple of the Lord God of Israel, who is in Jerusalem. Those who stay behind, wherever they live, should support those who want to go. Give them silver and gold, supplies and cattle, and special gifts for the temple of God in Jerusalem. Then the family leaders of Judah and Benjamin, priests and Levites, got ready to go to Jerusalem. Everyone God called to go to Jerusalem to build the temple.
All right, here's another one where you ought to go. Let me read that again. Did I read this right? Okay, so in the first year of King Cyrus's reign, what did he allow the Jews to do?
Go back.
Go back. Okay, go to Jerusalem and build the temple. Is he a Jew? Okay, who stirred Cyrus's spirit to allow the Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple? It's in verse 1. God did. Okay, again, he can use anybody. Okay, and we forget that. I forget that all the time. You know, he can use anybody. So what do these developments in Ezra's opening verses here tell us about God's involvement and his rule in our world today? He's always involved.
He can influence anybody.
He can use anybody.
His plan is continuing unfolding.
His plan is continually unfolding, and he will see it through. Okay? He's always faithful. God's work is not limited to believers. You know, he's sovereign over all rulers, over all nations, and over all peoples. That's everybody. Right? Okay? He's going to accomplish his purposes. No person, no matter how powerful, no matter how godless, is going to stop him. So we have to keep that in our mind when we think about the world we're living in. Okay, now are you ready? Let's go to Esther. Okay, so somebody read verses 1 and 2. Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 1 of Esther.
This event happened in the day of the reign of 120 from India to Egypt. At that time, Xerxes ruled the empire was ruled from in the third year of his reign. He gave advantage to all his nobles and officials.
Did I say 1 and 2? Got that? Okay. Okay, so how many providences did he rule? 127. And you may see Xerxes, you may see Ahasuerus, however you say it, either one of them. I go with Xerxes because it's easier to say. It's the same person. Okay, it's the same person. All right, the Persian Empire was the world's largest superpower up till this point. Okay, and she put a map in the book, if you have the book, to see how big it was. Okay, and again, we've got to think back to that time instead of now, because when they show this and they say it was 900 miles, well, how long would it take us to drive 900 miles today? Yeah.
It's about 10 hours.
Yeah, okay. They didn't drive. They walked 900 miles. That's a long way, isn't it? Okay, so we have to think about what the time period we're talking about when we think about this and how large it was and that they ruled there. Approximately a 900-mile journey separated Susa from Jerusalem. That's a long way, you know. Okay, so the story of Esther begins during Xerxes' reign. There's the 10 northern tribes have already been scattered for more than 200 years. Okay, for approximately 100 years, the southern kingdom of Judah had been in Babylon planting their roots. We just talked about that. But a small segment returned to Jerusalem from Babylon under Cyrus, but the vast majority stayed. Okay, and it's this vast majority of exiles that's going to focus in the book of Esther. Now, how do you think these Jews felt? If you were that stayed, how do you think they felt? Try to put yourself in their shoes. You're miles away from the land that God promised you. You're without a temple. You couldn't worship the way you'd always grown up worshiping. It's a new culture. You're a foreigner. How do you think they felt?
Fear.
Normally.
And they're in a land, they had to say, is God going to be faithful to his promise? Can he reveal to us when we're in this foreign land? All right, now, if you lived during that time period and you were given the opportunity to return, they come to you in the state you're in right now. I want you to do it at the age you are right now. Okay, here's the thing. You can return to your homeland where you've always been. And you can go back there and you can rebuild the temple and worship your God and bring spiritual reform there and rebuild the walls. Or you can stay where you've been all your life. What would you do? At the stage you are right now, what would you do? And why? There's no right or wrong.
I think it'd be hard to go. I think it would be hard to
Hard
go
to
back.
what? To go back?
To go
Why?
because all the work, a lot of work. It might be scary. You might be thinking, is this a trick? No, I don't know. There'd be a lot of questions.
I'm ready to stay where you are.
There's nothing. I know. There's lots of reasons to get all settled in and
Okay.
used to
Yeah.
things and
Anybody want to speak to the other side? Rachel, you'll speak to the other side.
go.
You would go. Why? She would go.
I could see the difficulties. I have a really good Turkish Syrian friend, and she's spent her whole life here. Her dad decided in his 40s to take the whole family back to Egypt. And they got there and they couldn't make life work. Like, it took them 5 years and they decided to come back. Now they're successful. They're in California. I mean, the pragmatics of it are hard to move a family, but there are a lot of joys, you know, that you'd have to hear a real clear voice.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, that's tough, yes.
Well, as old as I am, it would sound hard, but my thing is, if I could go back, I'm thinking where I'm at, there's a lot of idols, and if I could get away from that and go back and be just with my people and nobody's trying to influence me with that, that would help me mentally.
Now, is our lifespan what it is now? Or
Well, I don't
Well, and I was just thinking about, of course, that's a good point you got right there. But like as far as that, too, like after you've worked all this time and obviously they have what we have now, but like you can't physically carry everything that you own 900 miles, and you don't have moving vans or whatever. So like you truly would be starting over with nothing.
When I read that, I thought, why didn't they all just rush back? Why didn't they just all pick up everything and run? And then when you think about miles and some of the that's where they were and to sit here. Why did
Right.
they want your
And even though you're in a foreign land, that's not foreign to you anymore. That's foreign.
That's what I was going to say.
You know?
Like when we moved to Nicaragua, we were prepared for culture shock going down there. But I think it was worse coming back. Reverse culture shock. Coming back to the same house, the same church, even the same jobs, but
Not the same people.
well,
They weren't the same people.
no, exactly. And yeah, so it would be hard. I mean, I can see how it would be hard to return to what they knew at some point, in their prior life, so to speak.
Yeah, and really, all right, let's go back to Amy. You still got Jeremiah 29? 4 to 7 again. Let's listen to that as we're trying to answer this question.
This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce, marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and your daughters, in so that they may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also seek peace and prosperity in the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, too.
but memories?
They had grandkids. No one's going to just willingly move away from their grandkids. 900 miles.
Okay. So, again, we're just trying to set the stage here for the people who stayed, okay? Not that we're saying there was a right or wrong. Obviously, people that went back and rebuilt were right, and it's like what you said, you have to have a pretty clear, this is what God's telling me to do. Because it would be what stage of life you're in and what you have to do and your health, so many things there. So we're just trying to set the stage for what these people were feeling, and these were the ones, and they had to really rely on that, what Jeremiah told them, that God said. They had to really rely on that. They had to really think about God said for us to do this. Okay? All right? And those who stayed still had to be asking, though, is God still with us? Because they're not seeing him, and they're not having a temple, and they're not all the things that they're so used to. They're not having that. Okay? So, can we relate to the struggle of the exiles in Persia? Yeah, we can relate to it. Maybe not to the degree that they did, but you know, we're living in a foreign land, and we're living in a society where God is not honored. You know, and we don't hear from God like back then. Okay? And he may seem distant or he may seem absent, but he's not. Okay? We have to remember that. I thought this one pastor and theologian, she says he gets the exile's predicament. They couldn't see this God. They hadn't heard from him lately. In any case, they were living miles from land he called his own. Did this invisible God still have what it takes in terms of power and interest to reach out and touch their lives? This is the question we can reasonably surmise the exiles in Persia lived with. And it's a question we must ask ourselves today. Is God at work in our day and age, in the country where we live, under the government we find ourselves subject to, in the neighborhood that doesn't see life the way we do? Is he at work in our post-Christian culture? That's the question we have to ask. And the answer would be, yes, he is. And we have to remember that. We have to remember that. Okay? Thoughts about that? Comments? Something that's come to mind as we've talked about that?
Sometimes we wonder what we're called to, or should I make this decision or that decision? But this scripture is such a beautiful reminder that where you find yourself, whatever city you are, that we are actually part of the kingdom redemption, that we are working for the peace and the good and the beauty and the prosperity and the happiness and the wholeness of everyone around us, whatever city we're in. And I love that thought. When I remember that, you know, heaven comes down just a little bit, and it gets a little bit thinner, because I remember that actually we get to be the Esthers and Mordecais, you know, to get to remember what we're about and who we are.
Right. We're part of that grand story, this grand story. Wherever we are, wherever you find yourself, and whatever stage of life you're in now, and whatever's going on, wherever you are, that's what he's told us to do. You know, we plant ourselves. We make our homes. We be Jesus. We walk the walk, and we tell others about it. And that's what we're going to, as we go through this book, and we even said, don't be afraid to share. I mean, Esther says, if I perish, I perish. Well, that should be what we say too. You know, and so we're going to see that courage and the commitment that God has made to us. If he's faithful, if we're faithful, we go out and we be his hands. And yeah, it's time for you to go get your children. Okay? All right? Somebody else. Something to kind of sum that up. Something you heard tonight. And if y'all don't know Rachel's going to Africa. She's going to leave and go to Africa to live. So I knew what her answer would be. Yeah, she is. Somebody else. Something about this.
I'm still just trying to get this whole time frame, like the 70 years, and so the kingdom split, but they were still Jewish nations, so it wasn't really until Babylonians captured them. But when did God say, you'll be gone 70 years? And how long has it been that East Esther has been? I can't get that straight.
Well, do you have the book? Do you have the timeline?
Yeah, I looked at that. It's like 100 years. Like I did the math.
Yeah, and again, I just have to look at where 587 BC is where we're going to see the Jeremiah 29. Down at the bottom middle.
Okay.
And then we're going to see the Book of Esther come at 486 BC, which is about 100 years.
What's a 70 years?
Well, 70 plus 30 is 100.
Yeah. It said 50 years into Babylonia is when it fell and the Persians came in. So I thought, okay, that's the 50 of the 7?
50 and then 70 maybe? Yeah, I have to look back at that and see just exactly.
I just wonder how long they have been away from Jerusalem, and the temple, and the rituals, and the sacrifice. You know, they left in waves. Like,
Yeah.
You know, they didn't all go with the same. You know, like, they took all the no kings.
Okay, it says they were in captivity for 70 years.
And then they trickled back.
I was never good at.
And then sometimes I realize you cannot pin down the Bible
No,
to
you're right.
exact things like that.
Yeah, let me look back on that, and we'll see if we can come up with a little answer
I
to
just
that.
wonder how long has it been that they've been without their structure?
I would say for most of them their whole life. When you
Just think about the age of all of them as they went.
yeah,
A lot of them died off. Just like, you know,
Right.
just like with Egypt.
right.
And just like when they went to Egypt, they were told to, they were given the same command. You know, they work in bondage. That's true. They were supposed to work for the good, you know, have children and increase in number, and then of course they increased so much. They enemies, you know, of the Egyptians. So,
Okay, and this does say remain in captivity, which means they'd already been in captivity for those 70 years. So they'd already been in captivity for some point in time, and then they remained in it 70 more. So that may get us closer to that 100. You know, but I still would say that the good majority of them, that's all they'd ever lived and all they'd ever known.
and yet they knew they were Jews.
Yes, and that I'm sure was just passed down from their parents and grandparents and friends and village. They
And
did.
that whole generation to generation, how it's not as strong, you know, and so they begin to lose some of that. So
Yeah.
some of those folks that didn't go back were like,
Yeah,
I wouldn't want to do that.
right.
And then that, it's just,
And you have to know, too, they were Jews in this foreign land. Everybody there treated them like foreigners. So they weren't going to forget they were Jews because they were never accepted. It's kind of like when we say, well, you ain't from around here, you know, so we don't really love you, you know. That's the way it was. You're not from around here, so you're never going to, never accepted. So they felt that as well. They knew they were outsiders. All right, other comments? Love the discussion and the question. Can't answer them. I'll try to find out.
it's just fascinating. There's so many different things to think about.
And I know if you didn't like history and all that tonight, it probably wasn't your favorite kind of thing going back through it, but it's setting the stage for us to see so much of what God's going to do and help us to understand and apply it to us. I think we can see through here, like the video, these, coincidences. Oh, that right. And those weren't coincidences. God knew. He had his hand on all of that, as he does today. And it's like hindsight's 20/20. When we look back, we can look back in our own lives and go, well, that God did that. Maybe not at the time, we didn't really see it that way, but boy, when we look back, we're like, I know now why God did that, or why he didn't answer that. And I think we're going to see that. So I hope that you would really get into this. Again, if you haven't, read it all the way through. Even if you have, read it again all the way. It doesn't take that long, or listen to it, and it really does help you get the story. And go the Bible project, that's online, it's free. And watch it. It's really good. And so we'll start with, that got us through day 3. We'll do day 4 and 5 next week. So I'm going to get the children's in, and y'all have a great week. See you then.
Yeah, I know. Start doing this. I heard she kept naming names. Just like she's in my Bible class. She's in my Tuesday morning. Well, next week I told her I'd sit in there, kind of see how it works. But she didn't. She had this is just a stack of what she said to do for me to look over.
The only letters I think they filled out lesson one. I just don't get anything. They just don't. I guess, but there's still they get it when they're bound to read some of it.
Yeah.
That's
That's
how I
at
feel
least
about
you're
it.
trying. Yeah.
My grandsons, well, my son's family, they go to like a fellowship church in Franklin. One of their preachers or something said, anyway, long story short, said when God judges us, he's going to ask us 3 things. One, do you believe in my son? I can't remember the 3 now, but one of them was, have you spread my word? And I went, yes.
Well,
Bible
see, that's
school.
what I've been thankful because I'm like, we used to go when I was a teenager. We at church knock on doors and stuff, and that nowadays people don't want to.
Somebody can't. You can't do that.
And it's but this is a way. This is a way to reach. So I want to do what I can. So I was happy that I just Sharon Walker was sitting next to me. And she just introduced her at the eating, and she was like, because I had just prayed, and anyway, she said, so she knew all about it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Well, I try to now. I've gotten bogged down with too much to do in my Bible school. Too many. I got behind, and so I would have to skip this class.
Yeah.
But I try to keep up, with this class too. So
I know. I told her, I said, I love Esther. So I said, I
Now
read
that
her
books. Did you get the book?
No,
it's
I
at
just
that Christian bookstore.
I just with having the Tuesday morning class. That's it.
It's a lot. Listen.
So I went on and read all of Esther, but it's like such an easy book, and there's so I can Google and research it. So.
Because I know you've taught this. I love this. I meant to find you last week. I'm like, I'm going to text her. I'm not going to text her. I'm going to wait and ask her. I'd rather ask her that. Yeah, good at it. And I don't even know the session 4. What do we do? It's such a good story. Thank you.